21st, 2025, Eugene City Council public hearing and work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the instructions listed for this meeting on the City of Eugene's website and the public webcasts, meetings, and materials page. There is a public hearing and a work session on tonight's agenda. Please note that members of the public who sign up to testify in the public hearing may speak only on the topic that is the subject of the stated hearing. For those wishing to testify during the public hearing, please fill out a request to speak form available on the city's public webcast and meeting materials webpage. These request to speak forms will be used to generate the order of speakers and the correctly entered speaker's name into the public record. And we will accept request to speak forms until 5:35 p.m. As a reminder, the council's meeting rules of conduct include no flags, signs, loud or disruptive language, noise or conduct that obstructs the business of the council. Please keep the room quiet and respectful for all the speakers, and you are welcome to wave your hands in silent support. Additionally, we encourage all who are ill or who have had close contact with others who are ill to join our meetings remotely rather than in person. We also encourage attendees to spread out within the meeting space and wear a mask if you would feel comfortable doing so. We have some available in the lobby for anyone who needs one. In case of a medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, an AED, is located on the counter behind staff, located to your left, the west side of the room. And in case of emergency evacuation, emergency exits are through the double doors located at the back of the room, the double doors near the front of the room, and the doors to the patio can also be used as needed. And with that, I call this meeting to order. The first item on tonight's agenda is a public hearing for an ordinance adopting hazardous substance user fees. City Manager, would you please introduce the topic?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. As you just said, tonight's public hearing is on an ordinance that sets the annual hazardous substance user fees. As a reminder, it was in the packet. These fees are based on numbers of employees of businesses, not numbers of chemicals. The fee of $85.62 per FTE was recommended by the Toxics Board and is the subject of tonight's public hearing.
Thank you. I now open the public hearing. Staff, can you please share a list of the speakers on screen and announce the first speakers? Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the ordinance that you're going to be putting, or not the ordinance, the adjustment to the fee that you're going to do tonight. I had the privilege of attending a informational setting from the fire marshal about this program and this fee and the good work that it does for our community, our businesses, and especially our first responders. It was quite informative. He talked through about the whole toxic board, what is being reported on, who is being, what industries are subject to the ordinance and the regulations, and like I said, the good work that helps our first responders know what they're going into when they rush into a situation that may be at one of these reporting industries. The one thing that did stick out to me in the conversation was the fact that the toxic board has not been fully filled with people over the last few years, which means that they haven't been able to do all of their work. And that was kind of disturbing to me because it is an important thing that is happening in our community, and not having those seats filled. There's 2 industry, 2 advocates, and then 1 neutral position. So finding 5 people to sit on that board, I would hope wouldn't be that hard, but they've had to not conduct business for us sometimes because they didn't have the quorum or the full contingent of board members. So I just thought that was something that I would bring to your guys' attention, because I believe it is an important part of what we do in our community, and it was, I was disturbed to hear that. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mayor.
Thank you. I now close the public hearing. Any questions or comments from City Council? We have Councilor Clark and Councilor Groves in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a staff question. I suspect that it's for that fellow with the mustache in the back over there, who I can see. The fire chief, I suspect. I don't know that, maybe it is, Manager. Okay. I want to ask about, I know that the toxics ordinance itself, the statute, the whatever we want to call it, because it's in the charter, was voted on by the people, and it was their idea, not staff's. But I want to understand the importance of it as a regulatory, or as John was just mentioning. There's information there that lets our first responders know what they're charging into. That's a good piece of information I didn't know. That's great. I want to know what the other advocacy benefits are of the toxics. I don't know what to call it. I'll call it program. How's that? Or fire marshal. All right.
Am I on? Yeah. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and City staff. So to kind of get into your question, as far as what other benefit does that have, I'd say it makes the environment safer for the community as a whole. It also helps to keep this in the forefront of the industry mind. So having to do this annually and having to participate and have those surveys conducted at their facilities actually makes it a safer environment for them. So it's on the forefront of their safety in the facilities, which makes the community overall safer. I had a question at the Chamber of Commerce last week. It's like, is it safer if we look at rate of incidence of us compared to other similar cities of size with the same industries? We have a lower frequency of occurrence. So it makes the overall environment safer for us.
DEQ has primary responsibility for regulating industries that deal with hazardous substances. Am I correct in that?
No, it'd be the Oregon State Fire Marshal who has that currently. DEQ has a place in that as far as anything that's on the federal list, but who sets the actual state numbers is the Oregon State Fire Marshal.
So my real question at the end of this is, how does J.H. Baxter happen when it seems to me that we have 2 regulatory bodies that monitor such things in our community? How did that take place?
I couldn't comment on that. That was before my time.
Right.
Also, that's been here for a very long time. So you're talking about what we call a HAZWOPER, or a massive incident that's actually affecting the groundwater and other things in the environment. And it's due to the amount of time and the amount of substances in place.
So does our ordinance and does DEQ as with their policies, do we have all of the things that we need from a regulatory standpoint to be able to monitor our environment well enough to know how we prevent the next J.H. Baxter?
No. We don't have everything in place that we would need. That would take a lot of resources. What we do have does make the environment much safer for us and our citizens in our community. First responders.
I'm not going to take all the time at this moment. I'll go into that a little farther, but next time this comes up on the schedule, please know I will remember that question. Thank you very much.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a subject I know a little bit about from my former life. One of the things I was always asking while I was chief and deputy chief before that, subsequent to our Toxics Right to Know program, which really is it follows chemicals from when they enter industry and then they leave industry. So you're trying to figure out what goes into the product, what's volatilizing off into the atmosphere, what's channeled through waste disposal, and trying to track that. But one of the things, subsequent to the forming of the Toxics Right to Know charter change, the state came out with their own similar program. They aren't exactly the same, but they are similar. And one of the questions I asked repeatedly and never really got a clean answer on, is there a way to make one reporting form that's automated where industry can report everything that's needed, and then that populates both the city's list and needs as well as the state's, rather than them filling out two separate reporting systems, which I'm assuming that's still the way it's done. I've been gone for, well, May 1st will be 9 years. But I'm assuming it's still the same thing, where they have to fill out and report twice. Is that correct?
Correct. They do have to report to us, the state, and in some cases, they have to report federally as well.
Well, it seems that like, at least for the state, and again, at least back in my day, the systems were pretty similar, but not similar enough where one form would take care of it. But if we could work with the state and build an automated system, it just seems like that would relieve a lot of the work and just help make the process simpler for our community. My experience was always at the time that industry was more than willing to do the work and make the entry. Some industry didn't like it, the program, but they were willing to work with us. But then when the state's program came along, it just created more work than I think needs to be there. It just seems like there should be an automation fix that would be good for both sides. And then the final point I wanted to make, getting back to what John was saying, it is very hard to find people that want to serve on the Toxics Board. I know we would rattle cages out there trying to get people to have an interest and become involved, but it's not like a budget committee or a planning commission where we get plenty of people that want to be involved with it. It's usually if you apply, you get the position. I mean, it's pretty lean. So that's my 2 bits, and thank you very much, Mayor.
Not seeing any other questions or comments from council, we are going to move on and open the April 21st, 2025 Eugene City Council work session and possible action on an interim police auditor. Before we move to motion, any questions? Seeing none, I'll turn to Council Vice President to put a
to appoint default as the interim police auditor and authorize the council president to execute the interim police auditor employment agreement set forth in attachment A to this AIS.
Second.
Any further discussion from council? See Councilor Evans online.
No discussion, Mayor. I was going to make the motion, but Lindsay beat me to it, so we're good.
Thank you, Council President. I will now take a vote for this motion. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All in favor, all opposed? 0. And that motion passes. Vote of 7-0. Thank you all very much. This concludes our second agenda item. And our last agenda item for tonight is a work session on a council discussion of options regarding referendum petition 2025-1. City Manager, would you please introduce this topic?
Yes, Mayor, I don't have a lot of introduction. This is a continuation of your discussion that you had. If you recall during that discussion about the referendum, I said, I won't be coming with any information because no one's asked anything specific. So this is really a time for you to talk. We have the city recorder here if we need to bring her up to talk about any timelines. But other than that, I'd leave it to you and see what I learn as well.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you for that flexibility. And we may have some questions about timelines. I just want to begin with a couple of framing thoughts before we head into first council round. And first of all, wanting to thank you all for dedicating the time to this discussion tonight. As I know you all are experiencing and remember from even last week's public comment and every community meeting I expect that you're attending, there is an enormous amount of interest in the city's budget and in the solutions that we are working on for our city's budget gap. And I just appreciate the attention and the care that is going into even having those conversations and listening to people's concerns. About 2 weeks ago, council requested that we dedicate this additional time in this work session to discussion of learning more about what an alternative path might look like. And so a couple of thoughts related to that have been in my mind and that I would hope we can use our discussion to learn a little bit more about together. One, obviously, this council, every council, is continually challenged by the work of balancing our resources and our needs and sorting through that particular challenge. And we all know that in this work, but it's important to restate because it's not easy to do that year in and year out with the kinds of challenges that cities face. With the first round of feedback, if I could seed a question for discussion, I would be very interested to know what characteristics council might be interested in being a part of an alternative path, what kinds of traits you might imagine as a part of an alternative path. And the reason I'm asking the question that way is that I've heard some very specific characteristics and traits raised in conversation and in public comment at the public forum the other week. One of those very specific traits is a characteristic that I would describe as a time-limited or a sunset solution. That came up in a couple of different conversations, and I would be interested to hear what council thinks about that. We base our city financial projections on a 6-year window, so I'm imagining that the discussion that's coming forward is based on something like a 6 years or less window of time, but I think that's an important point of discussion. I've also heard interest in a solution that is not necessarily dedicated to a fire reserve fund and the creation of that fund, but is speaking more broadly to our general fund's needs and emergency city services needs, operations that are funded by the general fund. And so that would be a point of discussion. And then I'm sure there are others, but finally, to have 3 in this first list, a lot of feedback and discussion at this table over this past at least year and a half of time around the simplicity of implementation and how it is that we can minimize impacts on low-income families and our business community, but also be thinking about a way that this solution comes forward in an elegant way. So those are the 3 kind of big picture pieces that have been in my mind, and we've heard a lot from the public about. So I will open to council.
Thank you, Mayor. That was the police chief finally calling me back, so that was awesome, but wrong time. Your comments about what we might discuss, all 3, as near as I understood them, presuppose a short-term revenue addition of some kind. And I don't know that we've made that decision first. And I would say that if we're going to have a discussion of that sort, that first decision is first, as it were, as opposed to the idea that we should have a discussion that talks about what can the city afford to do long-term based on affecting its long-term permanent revenue stream, as opposed to short-term solution fixes. I don't believe those are the answer. I never have. I've advocated for a long time that we shouldn't do that. And so I have different feelings on each of those 3 items as I've heard the community weigh in, but I'm not in favor of any of them because they presuppose the idea of we're going to need, or we think it's best to try and ask people for more revenue. In the context of the solution, we would have to withdraw, as you know, the already imposed fee and come up with a new one. I think that's an article of bad faith with the people who have the 8,000 and more people who said, hey, no, we want to have a voice in this process. I think that would be an insult to those people. So I'm not sure I would feel comfortable with council pulling this off the board and coming up with some new fee. I think that's a bad idea. So, my input.
Counselor Kaczynski.
I would say first and thank you, Mayor and councilors. I would say first and foremost, I would be very uncomfortable with a repeal. I think that we do need this short-term income. I do not want to see the cuts that we know are coming without this fee happen. I think that's going to be very detrimental to our community. And I've been through these documents enough to know that we need sort of the immediate solution so that we are not having to deal with these types of in-depth cuts while we're continuing to work on the long term. Like, these are services that our community is going to miss, and that's going to be very problematic there. So I'm not comfortable with the idea of repealing the ordinance, and I feel like any alternative path, that would be the first step for it. I feel like some of these things are things that maybe we could have talked about if the conversation happened in November before I was here, but that conversation didn't happen then. So that's kind of where we are. Regarding the specifics, this fee was always intended to be ongoing funding. There are certain things that is foolish for us to do with one-time or sunsetting money, such as set up a new fire squad, or it's a new fire squad. And so I feel like putting a sunset on it limits it in a way that reduces its usefulness for the things that we are trying to get it to do. And then I think, having it be broader, we're being asked to do more with prioritization. And if we are going to earmark money and put restrictions on money to say it can only be spent on this thing, I feel like those restrictions should be the thing that we want to prioritize highest. And I think we can all agree that fire and fire services are a high priority for this community. And so, we have other areas where we have dedicated funding. We have a library levy, we have parks levy, we have pavement bond money. And I think having that specific dedicated funding to fire has merit and shows that fire and fire department is a priority for us. And I wouldn't want to pull that back and say we're going to prioritize, something, sort of a grab bag of things, or, something else. So that's, I think, where I stand on those specific questions.
Counselor Ye.
Thank you, Mayor. And first, I want to thank all my colleagues for being willing to have this discussion and have this opportunity to sit down and talk about this really very important issue. And it is not always easy to sit down and admit something could have gone better, and that perhaps there are adjustments we might make to do a better job. And that's how I see my job as a counselor, is always trying to do better. So I appreciate the way you framed this discussion, and I think you, Mayor, you brought up some of the highlights of what I think are also things that we should be discussing. I think a sunset is something really important, and while 6 years I think would be what I would want, I am willing to consider something shorter. I think 2 budget cycles would be nice, so I think that's probably 4 years, or I guess it could be 3 depending on when this goes into effect, but something around that time period seems to make sense to us. It gives us enough time to really talk about our budget and our long-term plans while not being so quick that we can't have these discussions in the community that it seems very obvious we need to be having. Spreading the funds out more broadly and with perhaps a name change seems to be something we're hearing a lot from the community. And while I was very much in support of focusing this on the fire department, and the plan that we made sense to me, it is clear that it doesn't make sense to everyone, and that perhaps reframing it a little bit will make it be more understanding to the public, and also still meet the main point of what we were trying to do. Around simplicity, I don't 100% understand where you're getting at, so that might be something we could talk a little bit more, so I'm not going to comment on that. I also do think if we're changing the name and reformatting a little bit of how it works, that we might want to consider whether we want to keep the additional 2 million that we were putting toward the fire department, or if we want to take an opportunity to lower the fee, which would obviously across the board lower the cost to folks in the community. That's all I have in my notes right now, but I'm really looking forward to see what other people have to say, and then circling back and seeing what we can do.
Councillor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor, and yes, thank you to all of you. We need to have this discussion and do it in a very thoughtful way. I think, I want to say thank you to Councilor Kuczynski and Clark that, I also respect this process. And I am definitely not opposed to going to the vote. I think the problem is that I see this timeline and this kind of emergency state of not thinking it's in the community's best interest if we have to cut all of these programs, or even, deeply using our reserve funding to get us as, a bridge into, when we can have this vote. So I'm not opposed to reworking the ordinance, putting in place a new ordinance. I'm not opposed to a sunset date. I do think 2 budget cycles is appropriate. We need time for developing the long-range planning. We need time for prioritization. And if we have to have kind of an end date to some of these things, it makes sense to me to have kind of a nice, runway in order to be able to not just close something overnight or, have to lay off whole programs in, a month's time, but be able to have, a longer-term plan. In terms of, Jennifer, Councilor, you said we have this opportunity, if it is not a fire fee, to do something else. I think it's important that we let the community know, if it is something else, exactly what that's going to. If it's paying for our library, we need to be able to say this, part of this is going to the library. If it's going to Parks and Rec, we need to say that too. But I think one thing that's become very clear to me is that we have an opportunity to help our fire department in other ways, which might be increasing or adjusting for the gap that we now see in our alternative response programs, which does lighten pressure for our enforcement teams and our fire teams. With that program kind of, not there necessarily and not understanding completely how the county can fill in, I would be interested in seeing what ways we could support the gap in alternative response with at least a portion of that 2 million that was planning on going to the fire. So I don't know where exactly we're going to land, but those are my initial thoughts, and I'm looking forward to the remaining part of this conversation.
Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, I'm in favor of another work session. After talking to council, we may ask for additional information so long as it would not result in elector choosing to vote for or against the fee measure. So with that in mind, I'd like to discuss several things. I saw in the AIS the cost of the election, which is about over $250,000. Thank you, Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to see the timelines for deadlines associated with both the August and the November elections. When do we have to make decisions? I'm not too interested in an August election. I think November is more appropriate, even though it still cost us $250,000. There's nothing on this, even though there's nothing from the city that's going to be on the ballot in November. That's why it would still be like,
That's
why it costs so much.
That's correct. It's the even versus odd. It's an odd election year. We would be the one responsible for paying for the entire amount unless there's something else on that. It doesn't have to necessarily indicate. Yeah, you can go, please. Oh, wait. It doesn't have to just be another city measure for it to be. If there was another county measure, then it would help set off the costs in November, but as of right now, this would be the only measure going.
That is correct. If it's more likely that there would be a cost-sharing option with another entity at the November election. If it was August, we would most likely absorb that completely. But when I got the estimate from the county, at that point, nobody else had indicated that they're going to November. That can change, obviously.
Thank you. So likely more than $250,000. Before I go to a vote, I'd also like to hear some more information about different options to explore. I have made up my mind if we want to do these things, but I want to hear about them. And the first of that is what would potential modifications look like that would, one, add a sunset, 2 or 3 biennial cycles out, where the council would have to continue the fire fee for it to continue, and 2, what the accountability or transparency mechanisms that were similar to the ones that we put in place for the road and the park bonds that Councilor Bettman and I put together in the very first road bond, those, the audit, the specific list, the citizen review committee, all of that stuff, how would we add that into that? And one of the key features of the fire fee was that it was dedicated to fire services. So if we're not going to do a fire fee, what would be options for a potential new fee that was not dedicated to fire services? What services would it fund? What would be the fee structure calculation that was not based on the square foot of a building like the fire fee was? If it's not a fire fee, that doesn't make much sense anymore. And then, and then what would we call it? Is another question. We did have a service fee that went to the ballot and got crushed. So that's probably not the best way to go in the future.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start this off differently than where I was going to start it. I think to blame this and blame the Chamber of Commerce is absolutely wrong and irresponsible. They did what we could have done, what we should have done, put this to a public vote. And I want to be clear on the record that that's how I feel about this, and they did our job for us. Secondly, I would love to find an off-ramp. I'm not sure what it is. I appreciate what Councilor Ye said about, we're all trying to do the right things here. We have different ideas of what that is, and I agree with her. I think this is a process we need to continually learn from what we do, how we do it, and always try and strive to do a better job. What I have heard loud and clear from the community is it's not that people oppose a fire fee. They are just sensing that, it feels like a bait and switch to them. And I don't think that was the intention when staff put this proposal together, but that's certainly the way it's being interpreted, and I can see why. If it's going to be called a fire fee, it should go, they feel, to the fire department. So I do think the name is important, that it captures where the money is going to go and what we are going to do with it. But regardless of what happens, however many work sessions we have, however far we want to kick the can down the road, at some point we need to have the hard discussion, and it's not going to be easy, but we need to come up with a system of priorities. What are our priorities as a council for our community? And then how does the community feel about that? And I'm sure people are going to be all over the map on this thing. But I think one of the problems that we have that kind of led us to this is the fact we don't have a prioritization process. And that's really not up to staff. That's up to us as a council and a body. We're the ones that have to make these decisions. We're the ones that need to stand behind whatever we do and whatever we decide. But that's got to be part of whatever it is we're going to do with this thing. I'm not opposed to another work session, just as long as we're working towards an actual decision and not just staying in this swirl of indecision. It's time to separate the chaff from the wheat and get to work on this. Thank you.
Councilor Clark and Councilor Kaczynski, I'm going to go to Councilor Groves first because I might have missed his small hand with that background. I'm sorry, Counselor Evans. I think I just said Counselor Groves, but Counselor Evans.
My hands aren't that small.
Sorry.
No. Thanks, Mayor. Just real quickly, question for staff. How much have we delved into our reserve for revenue shortfall in terms of what is available that we can use to close part of the gap? Does not jeopardize our credit rating if we decide to use, some of those monies to close some of these gaps.
Counselor Evans, I think we would be better prepared to answer that question either as part of the budget presentation or a follow-up work session that may be happening. Our current budget proposal is based on what we already thought was sort of the bare minimum of what we could carry in reserves. We need to make those reductions. So what we have done is identify some one-time dollars that we can use to bridge to what the 3.5 budget had was a bridge to a future revenue collection. Without that, it's not a bridge anymore. So what we also have is those dollars to either transition or bridge to something else, but it would be probably a maximum of 8 in one-time dollars. And that, if you are
You're
anticipating.
saying 8 million in one time?
And remember that it's on any new revenue, we're at least 8 months from being able to collect that, and it's about $1 million a month. So that's how I calculate it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That helps.
Thank you, Counselor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to emphasize what my friend Counselor Grove said. All of it, most importantly, the first part of what you said. I couldn't agree more. And to parallel what I was saying at first, I think the long-term solution for us that we need to talk about is the real policy choices that allow our permanent tax base to grow to a place where we can afford the things we want to buy and to decide which things we have to buy and which things we'd like to buy if we can afford them. But that policy discussion about what can we do to bring in more tax revenue long-term and permanently, and there are things we can do to solve this problem on a permanent basis rather than on a short-term basis, is the important discussion on policy and on priorities that we absolutely need to have. Secondarily, Manager, and I guess Council, or City Attorney, help me understand something, because you explained something at first, and I'm not sure I remember it right, and I'm looking for recollection here. So the difference between and a fee is that we were calling this, for example, a fire fee because the fire department is akin, in the argument, to a utility that we might have. Am I correct in how I'm phrasing that? Like MWMC or stormwater or another utility that we're running based on a fee, and that's different from property taxes.
Yes.
Am I correct in that analysis?
That is correct for that distinction, but it's not that narrow of a distinction when it comes to the difference between a tax and a fee. A fee can be for any type of service. You can have a park service fee that we impose just for the general use of parks in the city to fund the city. So in the explanation that was provided to you regarding the fire service fee, you're correct in stating it. But also, it's who the fee is imposed upon versus a tax. A property tax is placed upon the property owner, and a fee is not based on property ownership. And that's a very key distinction between a tax and a fee.
So what I'm searching for is, it seemed to make sense to me that like a utility, like a stormwater fee, everybody needs a fire department, so that operates a lot like a utility. And I understood the argument there, which is this is like a utility fee. But I guess my real question is, if we're just asking for more money for library and so we can pay Green Hill and whoever else, what's the difference between that and the tax? Is there, actually, a better question is there no difference if we're charging it to renters rather than property owners and calling it a fee? We can call it a service fee.
Right. The city service fee that was referenced, that was put out to vote back in the day, that was not a tax. It was a city service fee. It was assessed against whether it be a renter, but it wasn't assessed on property owners. So it is a distinction with a difference versus sometimes there's a distinction with no difference.
That's what I'm shooting for.
Right. And when it's for a property tax, you are taxing the property and the ownership of that property. A general city service fee can be assessed against whoever is, for example, whoever pays the utility bill. That has nothing to do with property ownership.
Which is why we can charge state entities like the county and the university, because it's a fee, is that correct?
100%. We cannot tax other governmental entities.
Which, by the way, the effect on those institutions is another part of this discussion we ought to have one day, because they don't have it either. But so the reason I'm asking that question is if we're going to call it something else, I wanted to understand what our restrictions are. But it sounds like there aren't many, so
It would
thank you.
be where you would hear me say, well, now we're getting into this, is if you changed the mechanism in which who was going to be paid, who was going to have to pay it, and how you were determining who was responsible for paying it. Altered it to say, well, we want to just assess it against the property, the fee against the property. Well, now you're into a property tax.
Well, I hope we will do the hard work of looking at the entirety of our budget and looking after the manager proposes our budget, what we might, any ways we might alter that, and then looking for a long-term solution rather than these short-term ones continually. Thank you.
Counselor Krasinski.
Yes, so a couple of different things. First, more logistical question. I would like to clarify when I'm looking at the packet that the cost for both August and November elections would be the same, assuming nobody else decides they want something on the November ballot. So it's not a plus or minus cost there to do one or the other.
Correct.
Okay. And I would like to second Councilor Zelenka's request for some more details about those timelines as we move forward and when those decisions have to be made. I want to clarify the budget that we are going to get on Friday that shows what the budget looks like without the fire fee in place. There's sort of no revenue option, alternate path, anything that could be put in place fast enough that it would be in effect in July 1. Is that?
It's not totally accurate. So I think you wouldn't be collecting revenue on July 1st, and you wouldn't be doing that under any scenario because we have to still build that. But I think there is a path forward that you could get pretty close. I think you could actually potentially adopt on the day you adopt the budget. There's a path to get there.
Okay, so that would be an alternate proposal that we agree on super fast.
You'd have to be quick.
And then we'd have to do a public hearing. We'd have to repeal the existing ordinance, do a public hearing for the new one, pass a new thing, and then that thing could potentially get referred to the ballot itself, correct?
Oh, wait, I should correct that, right? Is that true? If you did it under an emergency clause, which I think you would have to get to that date, I don't actually know if it could be referred to the ballot.
That's correct. If it is adopted with an immediate effective date, it is not. And also, to answer your question that both you and Councilor Zelenka had, if you're asking for the deadline, are you two seeking the deadline to repeal the existing ordinance? Is that the deadline you're seeking? We do have that.
I would also be interested in the deadline to make a decision about August or November.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, Counselor, you wanted to do an emergency election in August. I have to file the emergency paperwork with the county by July 10th. which means the decision would need to be made before then. And there's more steps, which I outlined in the PowerPoint presentation that was provided, and I believe it's in your packet for this round. So if there's anything specific about the steps that you have questions about, I can answer those. But I have to file all of the necessary paperwork to the county by July 10th for an August. For November, you don't have to do anything. I will, if you don't repeal by September 3rd, I will file that information to put the measure on the ballot for November. Yes.
And to clarify, the second part of the ordinance says this money can only be spent on new and existing fire services. That's correct? Oh, and also the administration of the fee and the relief fund for low-income households. I'm not phrasing it exactly 100%, but that's the first part of the ordinance, is that it is specifically earmarked for fire.
Correct.
And so what I wanted to sort of make a comment. We keep talking about short-term and long-term solutions and prioritization. This is, I feel like as we're going through this and as we're working through it, there isn't some sort of magic bullet that's going to solve all of the budget problems. We're not going to be able to sit down, have a 3-week conversation and be like, yep, we fixed it. We know that we like this thing and don't like that thing, and so on and so forth. There's going to have to be some incremental work. And the fire fee was not a short-term solution. It is a small solution that was initially intended to be an ongoing long-term solution. So it doesn't fix everything, but I think saying that it only becomes a short-term solution if we put a sunset on it. And now I'm out of time. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
Talking about this for a year and a half. And then after all of that, it kind of came down to what Councilor Kaczynski was talking about, which is that it's pretty much a binary choice. You either cut services or you, in the short term, you cut short services or you raise revenue. Pretty simple. There's no pixie dust, there's no magic dust that's going to solve this problem. It's one or the other. And the list of services that were being cut was a bridge too far for me. But so, city manager, in the end, why did you recommend a fire fee as opposed to a city service fee or some other type of fee that we might?
That one I'm going to have to throw my body on because we're talking about an election measure, and her explanation of why she thought the fire fee was the most is getting into being an advocacy of why someone may want to vote for the fire fee. So I'm going to advise her not to answer that question.
There's tape on that.
Let me ask a question, a different question then. So a couple of years ago, we did a general service fee. It went to the ballot, and that one didn't fare well because of the nature of it being a general service fee. And that wasn't what you recommended, correct? And when we talk about prioritizing the budget or a priority process, to me, that, and to many others, that's just code for cutting libraries and parks and rec programs, community centers, pools, because it's zero sum. The amount of things that you can cut within the general fund are those or police and fire. Police and fire is 60% of the budget of the general fund. And so if you don't cut there, you have to cut in the other places. So those people that want to prioritize all this, I would say all those things are just as important to me. It's just as important to me that we have a quality of life, that we have libraries, we have park and rec programs, we have community centers, we have pools. And when I go talk to people and ask them what they think the city needs, the things they say is more things for our children to do, that life services, And those are the things that, or childcare is another big one that I often hear. That's not something the government necessarily provides, but those are the things that people want to see. I think what the fire fee did is actually preserve that.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to point out that police and lurks is almost the same percentage. These are expensive items that we have. When we do start looking at prioritization, I'd like to see some benchmarking against similar-sized communities and how they're structured and how they are apportioning their budget. But more to the point of how we move this thing forward, Mayor, do you have a plan, I'm assuming, of a series of questions that we need to vote on to move this forward? Or I'd like to hear from you what you were thinking about how we move this forward.
I was thinking the most important thing to do tonight was to follow up on the direction to have a conversation about an alternative path. And that because at our previous work session, there was a unanimous vote that said, yes, we are interested in trying to find that or learn more about what that alternative path might be, that was the first hope for this evening. And I think we're on our way to some of that. The other piece to your question, I've had a chance to talk a little bit with the city manager about, is just understanding the timeframes and timelines that we have to work with. And so, city manager, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about that. We have the opportunity, I think, to come back to this conversation and continue to develop it with some urgency and some purpose. But it's not an extraordinary amount of time.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I have taken a look at the calendar, and as you know, I think Councilor Groves, you said you're willing to do another work session as long as there's action. I think that was you that said that.
And quickness.
And, yeah, and there's no way if the majority of the council, and I understand not everybody is in the same place, but if the majority you adopt would mean, essentially what you're talking about, if it's a short-term revenue, would be a new ordinance that has to go through all the steps of any ordinance. And so there's 2 public hearing dates between now and when you go on break, and the only one we would be able to make is June 16th. So in order to make the June 16th public hearing date, you have to have basically finalized your decisions, and we've written the ordinance, and it's going by the 28th. And so by the 21st, I'm looking at the meetings of May 21st. You only have a couple of meetings. So you have this coming Monday, April 28th, we could potentially use one of the work session times to try to get an idea of where you're going. May 12th, you're talking about the city manager recruitment and the police auditor recruitment. I recommend you still do that. We could turn around on the 14th and keep going. What I'm hearing so far, if you really want to move to action, you've already answered some questions around potentially a sunset, potentially accountability, not fire, not an extra 2 million potentially. We could start to put some of those things together and you have something to react to, or we come back on Monday, the 28th, and you continue to just give us direction that if it's leading towards an ordinance, every time you give us a hint, we're probably going to start writing it in order to hit your time frame, if that's what you want to do. Does that help?
It does. Thank you, City Manager. So I had Councilor Ye in the queue, and then I'd like,
I still
I'm
have a
sorry,
little bit of time left.
Councilor Groves, I was just going to offer a clarifying thought that if we could close that round and those questions and then really come back to a little bit of framing of what the city manager just offered. So please go ahead.
Just, I won't take the full 2 minutes and 21 seconds, but the other piece too, and I've mentioned this several times, I'm personally willing to look at some alternatives, but I want to do that in short term and do it quickly. But I want to respect the process that we have gone through where this was referred to a vote. I think it's important to respect what has been done here. Whether individuals like it or not is really irrelevant. We had a group of people that exercised their rights to refer this to a referendum to the voters. And I think we have to be really careful with a repeal, how we do that, and make sure we've got some of these people involved in the room that were involved in the process. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm not willing to just discount that. Thank you.
Counselor Ye, and then I also see Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councilor Groves, I think you bring up a good point, right? We've kind of got ourselves in a unique situation where it is difficult to get everyone in the room and talk about something, and a repeal is, while uncomfortable, potentially the option we will decide to take. And any way that we can bring people to the table, I think is worth the time and effort to do so. I mean, it's not like these people are invisible. They have websites, and I'm sure we can reach out and figure out who to talk to. So I do think that that is definitely worth our efforts in this process. The other thing I just want to share with the mayor, you know, I'm willing to make time for a special meeting if we need it. This is extremely important. It's the most important thing on my plate right now. I think for many of us, we feel like that. So if that needs to happen, I am happy to make the time to be here and do that. If not, and we can fit it in, great. I think the things that the city manager was already talking about for a potential ordinance, that's also my impression of the conversation and the things that we should be talking about and working on as we move forward to really nail down and get to the specifics, because yes, some of them we're not quite there yet, but I think we've got all the right things on the table, is what I'm trying to say. I also want to say, you know, one of the things I've learned through this process is it is not true that there are people out there with this evil intent to kill our library. I think ultimately we all want a good city. We want a city that is thriving and has all the things that we need. We don't always agree on how to get there. We don't always agree on all the particulars, but I don't think there's an evil intent out there. And much of the problem is that we are not doing a good job of communicating with each other. I think we've often talked about how we don't tell our own story. Well, we don't. And when we're not doing that and we're not investing in those conversations, this seems to be a product of that. And it's hard to set aside city money for conversations and for education, because it feels like if we're doing that, we're not doing something else. But it has become very clear to me that we need to invest in that type of conversations with our community. We did an excellent award-winning job on middle housing with Democracy Now! And all that work we did. But we were like, well, we can't afford to do this all the time. And it seems like we can't afford not to be doing this all the time. And that as we're working on this budget problem, I hope that we will continue to come back to how are we going to fix this problem of making sure people have the information they need to understand what we're doing, because I don't think anyone here is corrupt or is funding fluff. But that doesn't mean everyone understands that. And how do we do a better job of getting that information back and forth so that we're having a conversation where we're all at least starting in the same place? Yeah, that's my speech for today.
Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. Apologies for afternoon. I will see you all shortly in person. I wanted to add my 2 cents about process. This is part of the process, and any opportunity for a collaborative compromise is also part of the process. And I respect my colleagues' opinions. I have a fundamentally different take on what I view as not only part of the process, but obviously we're going to have 8 different sets of eyeballs on what priorities are. I want to be very clear. The chamber and other stakeholders are longing for a sunset. If we have some sort of negotiation or compromise, I can get there. It's my understanding that there's a longing for like a 2 or 3 year sunset. I'm more in the 10-year camp. So maybe there's a middle ground of a 4, 5, or 6 year sunset. There's a longing for an oversight committee. I would submit that council is an appropriate oversight committee. Maybe there's an opportunity, as we do when we go out for bonds and levies, to have a mayoral appointed oversight committee that includes some counselors, some budget committee members, and some community members. I could live with that. I am just wondering what exact dates are the off ramps, and if we are booked, let's unbook ourselves. And as Councilor Ye made very clear, this is a top priority. Let's make it the priority to get whatever collaborative compromise in place needed to avoid a costly, and not just a financial costly election, an election that would be costly in that it would be so divisive to our community. I have no appetite to advance an election, a special election in August, when there are fewer folks here and elections are not on top of anyone's mind. If we do any election, I would submit, colleagues, that the most appropriate time would be November. But if there are off ramps, if there's a new way forward, if there's an alternative direction, it is worth exploring. It's worth having those conversations. And will it result in some cuts? Sadly, yeah. But will the impact be less divisive, less costly financially, and less costly to?
Thank you. I'm not seeing Counselor Evans any longer, though he did have his hand raised a moment ago. Oh, there he is. Sorry. Counselor
Yeah,
Evans.
my hand is up, Mayor, but I'm trying to keep from sticking my foot in my mouth right now. One of the things that I totally agree with Councilor Zelenka and Councilor Groves on is the fact that, we have delivered these services when we're talking about library, parks and rec, animal services for years. So there's a certain expectation that our community has in terms of delivery of those types of services and how the city plays a role in that versus other models that are out there where, and even as close as next door Springfield, you have Willamette Lane. It is a different model. The city of Springfield is not involved in their parks and rec situation like we are as we have it here in Eugene. So, that requires us to have a longer and broader discussion, which I understand we don't have the time to do that right now. However, if we can get to a place where, one, we don't have to go to the ballot with this, that we can work out a short-term compromise solution that has an end date to it, then we might have the time to have that broader conversation about how we deliver services, what services that this community expects to deliver, and maybe we do go back to being what I would call, totally transparent with this and say, let's call it a city service fee. I mean, it's not like the fire department is going to have that much of a major benefit from this fee. It will benefit to some degree some of the things that need to be closed in terms of gaps in fire, but it's not a panacea. And I think that if we can cobble out and craft a short-term bridge for this, I would be in favor of looking at that in lieu of having the longer, broader conversation about what it is we can deliver as a city versus what it is that we can no longer sustain over a long period of time. And let's figure out a different way of delivering those services and paying for it.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor. The city manager, if directed to come back to us with alternative measure or measures to discuss what are the best pathways forward if this is not a fire fee in terms of the structure of the fee. That's one of my biggest considerations right now in terms of, okay, if we're not basing this on square footage or if we're not, if we don't have a mechanism in place.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to say, try to answer a couple of your questions all at once, which was one of the questions about the off-ramp and the timeline that Councilor Keating brought up. I think I said earlier, if you want that off-ramp and you want to put something in place before you go on break, we can deliver that if you can deliver that. And I think the part that's going to be the most challenging is some of the things you've talked about we've written before in other ordinances, so the idea of a sunset or an oversight committee, all of those things are not challenging because we've done that. I think the most challenging piece will be determining exactly what you said. If it's not one thing that's based on square footage, what is it and what do we bring forward, and how you work through what seems fair to a business and a low-income person, that is actually the most challenging piece of it, and I think why I appreciate the mayor talking about simplicity. So the part that's challenging from a staff perspective is we can bring you back some options pretty quickly, I think. However, they won't be fully vetted out, and I have to remind you, the same people that are doing the financial analysis we are like so in the middle of the budget process and are going to be like responding to putting the presentation, the questions, working with all of our unions on notifications. Like there's a lot of work happening right now, and so that is going to necessitate, if you want to get this done before break, that it stay simpler. But I think we can bring you some options.
Do you feel like if we directed that to work today with some guidelines, I think from hearing what I've heard tonight, I think we have enough support to be able to get there in the next, 30, 40 minutes, at least to come back to discuss, would it be possible to bring back a draft ordinance to discuss within the next couple weeks?
So whether it's a draft ordinance or an outline of options, I'm thinking to like our 3115 discussion where you had like outlines and decision points where you could make, that's what I envision having come back to you. And we would have enough to be able to do that.
Yeah, it just depends on if you want to continue it. So just as a reminder, we typically send you out packets on Thursday. Those things are due like tomorrow. We're talking about potentially continuing this on Monday, so that would be very challenging. We would just be bringing you information during the work session and not sending you a lot of information if we do that on the 28th. And I will just say to the point about clear the calendar, there's a couple of things I think we cannot clear. So one of them is on the 28th, we can clear the housing implementation pipeline to your report, but we really need to do the HUD work, and that is one of your highest priorities. That needs to happen. So I think you need to do that. I think you also need to start your discussion about the city manager recruitment. You need to do the police audit. Those things you have to do. Everything else we can kind of move and make space for. So, yeah, if you give us direction tonight, bring us back information on components of a new ordinance that we've talked about tonight, I think we could bring that with some options. I don't think we would need a lot more than that.
Great, thank you. And like Councilor Ye, I am also willing to, have a special meeting, emergency meeting. This is important. I think, we need to make some decisions. We don't have to make our final decision tonight. We can say, come back, let's look at some viable alternatives. Let's put those viable alternatives out into some of the community to see, you know, how does this sit? How does this feel? In order to do that, with our limited time frame, we need to be acting quickly. So I hope that we can all come to some level of agreement tonight to get there. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kaczynski.
So I think one thing that I keep thinking about with this is that the communications I've gotten from my constituencies have been, I would say 10, 15 to 1, that they don't want to see the services cut, that they're fine with the fire fee. I've gotten some that have said, I don't understand it. I've gotten some that said, I don't like it. I think that when we have these kinds of public engagement processes, and I've seen this since the very beginning of when I started getting involved in Eugene, is that you do a lot of public engagement. You go out, you say, here's this thing we're thinking of. What do you think of it? What are your priorities? What do you want? And most people are like, I don't really care that much. I just want, you know, the fire truck to show up when I call. Or they're like, yeah, sounds good to me. Those folks don't show up to public comment. And they don't come and say, you know, hey, I think it needs to be changed in this way. I think it needs to be changed in that way. It's the group of folks who are unhappy with it for some reason. And we don't know whether the group of folks who are unhappy with it are the majority. Are they in the minority? We don't know that. And so this is part of the reason why I get nervous when we start talking about, like, here's the way we could compromise, let's put a sunset on. All of those options make this a less good option for solving the challenge that our communities are facing. And so I don't know how I feel about putting in place a less good option, because we're never going to be able to make everybody happy. And so then it becomes the question of, are we making a group of folks who are frustrated for one reason or another happy in expense of what is better for our community in the long term? So that is one of the things I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about this. I would be, you know, I'm going to do what's going to keep the services in place, because I think keeping those services in place is extremely important. I think once our other budget comes out, we're going to start hearing folks who are like, wait a second, and I think we need to be careful about saying, hey, we're going to just try and respond to every single complaint we've heard throughout the whole thing and make it a less useful tool as a result. So that's a little bit where I am. Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wanting to be open to all ideas that create less conflict in the community. I think that's a wise decision to make. However, like Councilor Kaczynski, I feel that we've put a process in place here where we had the choice as a council whether or not we send this to the people in May. And this council decided it knew best and it wanted to go ahead with the fire fee. And my vote was that I thought that was an unwise way to go, but we did. And so now the community has responded to us and said, no, we want our say on this. I'm having a real problem with the idea that we would deny them that after they used the democratic process to say, we will have our say. We're talking about short-circuiting their ability to have their say. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable, especially when it seems like for granted that we're just going to put some other kind of new fee in place. That seems very disingenuous and very much at bad faith with the electorate who used the democratic process the way it's supposed to be, when we had a choice to ask them in the first place. So I'm very concerned with the speed and the process this conversation is taking. So needed to say that.
Thank you, counselors. I'm going to insert myself into the queue for just a second to try to reflect a little bit of what I've heard, which will also allow for a very elegant entry of Counselor Keating from virtual to physical form, or remote to physical form. First, just to state the obvious, that we are still in this process, and we are in this process together every day as long as all of us are continuing to be asked and being willing to provide the service to our community. And so I just want to reiterate that I don't think that there's anything about gathering information from this conversation and being able to talk with one another about how to find a path to greater agreement that undermines a process. We're actually seeking a greater amount of agreement to see if that's a possibility. And I think that that's important to acknowledge. It doesn't mean that a path has been chosen and this body hasn't made a decision about anything, but I think that is important to this work. And I think you all know he appreciates your efforts in that service and that work. A couple of things that I've heard that it sounds like, and I'm going to ask in a moment for the city manager to just reiterate a little bit more about timelines for following up information, because there were a lot of comments about session likely Monday, 8th, to receive more information and be able to continue the conversation. But in relationship to that work session and discussion, that there is interest in discussion of a sunset scenario, of a time-limited scenario. A whole range of years from 2 to 10 have been referenced, with 4, 5, 6 years being the middle ground referenced and 4 years being referenced in other cases by other counselors. So I think more information from staff could be helpful in understanding the implications of that type of path. Related questions about the clarity around the naming of this fee and how it is supporting our Eugene Springfield Fire, emergency services through our fire department and police, EPD and ESF, as well as other core city services. But feedback around the name and clarity on that front. And then more follow-up on structure and billing so that we can understand how to, we can just understand impacts, especially to lower income households and business community, see what that billing is like as some of these other things are shifting, and then an update on thoughts of implementation and that timeline. So those are what I had captured, that I want to take a temperature from this body to know if next Monday's work session, following up on that, sounds like a good use of time.
Yeah, so in order to, so I'll just say this. So again, I'm working off the dates that you have that are already established council meeting dates. I'm not assuming the addition of emergency meetings or extensions. So I'm just going off your normal stuff. So for June 16th public hearing, the actual title for the new ordinance is due on May 28th. That's also sort of the last day you could even potentially send it to public hearing. So if you want to work yourself back a little bit, May 21st would be the last day. So on that day, you would need to have, we would need to have an ordinance in front of you that you say, yep, that looks good, send it to public hearing. Or it's good enough, send it to public hearing, we want to hear what they have to say, because you can always adjust it afterwards. So that gives us April 28th and May 14th. One of those is a 45, one of those is a 90, to keep drilling down. So I think on the 28th, I mean, that's just a week. We could come back with some of this information. I don't know if we can hit all of the modeling. We have some ideas from previous work that we can just kind of change, but we could definitely start to fill in some of the details on the 28th, which I think is important, honestly, because if we don't start then, by the time you get to May 14th, which is your next meeting, it's going to be really hard to hit the mark. If you say, no, that's terrible, go a different direction.
Councilor Kaczynski.
very small timeline logistical question. Would there have to be a vote to repeal the existing ordinance before we could start having public hearings and things for a different?
No.
And I'll just say, I wanted to go back to something I said. I know I'm going to make our chief financial officer really happy. She doesn't even know that I'm about to do that. Part of my, part of why we would want, if you're really going to do this, when we start talking about, Counselor Evans asked about reserves and a bridge, we're only bridging, there's only a bridge if there's someplace out here we're landing. If there's not something out there, you don't want to implement a new fee, that's not going to happen, then essentially what we're doing is we're just spending reserves down, which is really not responsible and not something I could recommend. So that bridge is if there's something in place. Otherwise, we're transitioning services as fast as we can because it would just be not okay to continue to fund services with one-time dollars and run our reserves down. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion from council today? If not, then I think we have some sense of where we're headed for next week and maybe some work ahead in weeks to follow, depending on that discussion.
Need a motion?
Yeah, I think it would be
Okay.
great to have a motion.
I can do that. Move to direct the city manager to schedule a work session on April 28th for further discussion of council's options. And May 14th? Is that what? 14th.
Second.
Any further discussion? Now take a vote for this motion. All in favor? 7, and Councilor Evans, 8, and the motion passes 8-0. Thank you all. Thank you for discussion today. This concludes our agenda, and we are adjourned.